And hello, everyone. My name is Carole Ridley, and I'm here as the coordinator for the Pleasant Bay Alliance, and we're very pleased to be able to share our experiences of the Pleasant Bay Watershed Permit with you today. As you can see from our first slide, this is definitely a team effort. So the Alliance is an organization of 4 towns, Orleans, Chatham, Harwich, and Brewster, and we work with technical consultants for the towns, as well as for the Pleasant Bay Alliance, as well as DEP, the Cape Cod Commission, EPA. So many folks have contributed to this effort. So I'm going to provide a quick overview of sort of how the permit evolved, and then hand it over to Mike Giggey, who's going to talk about performance under the permit and some of the changes we're looking for as we head into year 6. And then we do have some highlights to share from 3 of our member towns. So Mike's going to cover Orleans, and then Greg will speak to some issues for Chatham, and Mark for Brewster. We don't have anyone speaking for Harwich today, but I do want to stress they're a very active, important member of this watershed permit effort as well. So with that, this gorgeous body of water, which is hard to see from this view, but it is a beautiful location on the Lower Cape, Pleasant Bay. This is a 21,600-acre watershed that is shared by the 4 towns I mentioned, Orleans, Chatham, Harwich, and Brewster. And I would say in the mid-1980s, the 4 towns were very concerned about a wide range of resource management issues, things like the proliferation of shoreline structures and interest in aquaculture and various other topics. Including nutrient pollution, but there were a range of topics that motivated the towns to seek designation of Pleasant Bay as an area of critical environmental concern, which is a Massachusetts state designation. That led over a decade, so mid-1980s to about the mid-1990s, the completion of the first resource management plan that was adopted by the 4 towns. And as I mentioned, that plan encompassed a wide range of issues, but certainly was the beginnings of recognition of the importance of looking at nutrient pollution in Pleasant Bay as the lead water quality concern. That kicked off a bay-wide water quality monitoring program that we launched in 2000. So we're now going to be starting our 25th year of data collection, thanks to our many, many dedicated volunteers. I can't thank them enough for the work that they do. And that water quality data was very essential. It led into the development of the Mass Estuaries Project report that was completed about in 2005, 2006, and then the total maximum daily load reports for Pleasant Bay. We have 19 TMDLs for total nitrogen in this system. And so that's about 2006. At that time, the towns, at various paces and stages, started to work on this issue, within their towns. So we had the 4 towns proceeding to meet their requirements under the TMDL, kind of independently, but coordinated through the Pleasant Bay Alliance. So fast forward a couple of years to 2018, and a watershed permit is issued to each of the 4 towns. So that didn't happen sort of its own. It followed a 2-year pilot project that involved the Alliance helping to coordinate the participation of our 4 member towns, but also Massachusetts DEP, the Cape Cod Commission, US EPA. We had many, many partners involved in this pilot project exploring the feasibility of the watershed permit. Here we are at our 6-year mark. We feel that we have some lessons, some experiences that may be of interest and may help other communities as they look to this opportunity, especially if you're a shared watershed. Our role as the Alliance has been as a coordinating entity. The Alliance does not hold the permit, and we do not implement wastewater management actions. We are a coordinating entity, and we do that primarily through our watershed work group, which is a group that's formed of representatives from each of our member towns who are primarily responsible for this issue within their community. They're technical consultants. We have hired Wright-Pierce on behalf of the Alliance to help us with the coordination effort. We also have regular participation from Massachusetts DEP, many of the folks that were mentioned earlier on the slide from the Southeast Regional Office, as well as the Boston office. as well as the Cape Cod Commission and other interested members of the public. We have select board members and others who from time to time participate in our monthly meetings. So this is a great forum. It provides structure, it provides an opportunity for information sharing, and it's been a great source of accountability too over the period of our work. We also are responsible for the annual reporting under the watershed permit, and I think Mike's going to talk a little bit more about that. We also have played a role in grant writing and grant administration. So we've been very fortunate to receive funding through the Southeast New England project. We've received a number of SNEP grants that have helped with some very early critical implementation issues, and we're going to hear more about those a little bit later. We've received funding from the MVP program, Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness, as well as CZM Coastal Resilience, and all of these efforts feed into our work. So that's been our alliance role. As I mentioned, the towns sort of started and still are implementing their comprehensive wastewater management plans or nutrient management plans, as they're calling them different things, independently within their communities, but through a coordinated process for the Pleasant Bay watershed. Once the TMDLs were issued and that work began, it took a few years before we were at a point where the towns working at different paces and focusing on different technologies reached a point where we really had enough information to pull together what we called at that time our composite comprehensive wastewater management plan. So with the help of Wright-Pierce, we worked from the analysis and the data that the towns had collected and put together and compiled a composite plan that looked at each individual town's plan for Pleasant Bay, for their portion of Pleasant Bay, to see if it would get the job done in terms of meeting the targets. So we were able to verify that we were able to meet the nitrogen removal requirements of the TMDLs. One of our first steps was, once we had that information pulled together, we went to our select boards. We actually convened a meeting. It was at one of the One Cape meetings. We had a special select board meeting where we invited all 4 town select boards to attend and introduced, and they subsequently adopted, a resolution that acknowledged their shared nitrogen contributions to the Pleasant Bay watershed, each town's contribution, and each town's removal responsibility. And that was really a critical point of the towns, first of all, getting together, signing a common document that acknowledged each other's responsibilities. That document also expressed interest in exploring the feasibility of a watershed permit through the pilot project that DEP had invited the Pleasant Bay communities to participate in. So that was a very important early step in gaining local acceptance to explore the idea of the watershed permit. And throughout that pilot project, we essentially developed the core components of what would later become the watershed permit. The first core component was what's referred to as the Targeted Watershed Management Plan. So that composite plan that Wright-Pierce had developed earlier on was sort of the foundation, and that was further developed with much more detail for the purposes of the watershed permit. We also developed the terms and conditions of the actual permit that would be issued to the towns individually, and that, you know, there were some features of that we wanted the towns to understand, primarily that by participating in a watershed permit, and as long as each town was holding up their responsibilities and their terms and requirements, that there would be enforcement forbearance for any Clean Water Act issues around excessive total nitrogen. So that was an important selling point, as was the idea that by participating in a watershed permit, the watershed communities would have a competitive advantage to seek 0% or low-cost financing for implementing nutrient management strategies. Those were 2, I think, of the important selling points. I think a third was a sense of mutual assurance that each town understood its responsibilities and was going to be accountable, so that one town wouldn't be, you know, pulling their weight while other towns weren't. So this was a way for all of the towns to know what each other was doing and to be assured that they would be accountable and fulfilling their reduction requirements. I guess Also, I would just mention that it was important during this process for us to understand and pursue consistency determinations with the 208 plan from the Cape Cod Commission. So that was an important part of the process as well. And also making sure that we aligned with all of the MEPA requirements. And of course, the towns individually had done a lot of work going through MEPA for their individual plans. So we were able to leverage that prior work. So that's a very high-level overview of how we got to participating in the permit and how we developed some of those initial core components prior to the regulations that are now in effect. So now I'd like to introduce Mike Giggey, who is with Wright-Pierce, technical consultant to the Pleasant Bay Alliance, to share information with you about the performance under the first 5 years and what we're looking for in year 6.
Thank you, Carole. Good morning to everyone. We're in the 6th year of the first ever DEP watershed permit. I want to tell you about what we've accomplished over that period, and I'd like to review 6 evaluations we've done to try to prepare ourselves for the next 15 years. Here's the targeted watershed management plan that Carole mentioned. Important to understand the numbers that we're working against. The Mass Estuaries Project determined that the watershed loads back in the 2002 to 2004 range were about 48,000 kilograms per year. The TMBLs together give us an aggregate threshold of about 30,000. So the difference between those two is the 17,000 kilograms per year that these 4 towns have committed to remove under the watershed permit. How much is 17,000 kilograms per year? It's a lot of nitrogen. If sewering were used to solve the problem, it would be about 4,000 homes connected to public sewer. If innovative alternative treatment systems were used, it might be 6,000 homes. It gives you a perspective. As most watersheds on the Cape, most of the loading is septic systems. Another 25% of the total is stormwater and fertilization. There are 19 sub-embayments, and the degree of impairment varies widely. Many of the sub-embayments require no nitrogen control. Some require 100%. The important aspect of the permit formulation was to get the 4 towns to agree as to who's going to take care of the 17,000 kilograms. Now, the thought in the beginning was, we'll let Chatham do it all. Well, when we got serious about it, the town's committed to this distribution of responsibility. Note that Orleans, the smallest town, has the largest share of the load, and that's because their embayments are the most threatened. This is the heart of the permit. It's the implementation plan. Look at this as one column of nitrogen load responsibility for each town, and then 4 rows representing the 4 5-year segments of the permit. Of note here is that the bottom right-hand corner, there's the 17,700 kilograms per year in total commitment. And you can read through the matrix and see how much load is expected to be removed by whom. If you plot that chart in a bar chart form, the height of the blue bars is the cumulative amount of nitrogen to be removed. And the plan on the table today is by year 20 to be slightly more than the 17,700 shown there in the dotted line. I've shown in green a new number, a new goal. The 17,000 number relates to a report done in 2006, that is almost 20 years ago. So there's been some growth, there's been some change in philosophy, change in technology, and we're now working on the height of that green bar. How much more do we need to remove to address current conditions? We issue an annual report, and this is the progress chart from last year's report. After 5 years, we had a 4,900 kilogram per year target for year 5. We got about 90% of the way there. What technologies did we use? Well, the technologies that are in place today, there are 5 of them, that add to the 4,500 kilogram per liter removal. About half of that total is in public sewers, largely in Harwich, but also in Chatham. About 25% of the removal is in is fertilizer management at the Captain's Golf Course in Brewster, both reduction in fertilizer use and fertigation. And there's a small component is the aquaculture system that's been quite successful at Lonnie's Pond in Orleans. Orleans will be adding significantly to the mix with both public sewers and PRBs. An important point I want to mention is that these numbers aren't quickly calculated. It's a fair effort to determine just what the nitrogen credit should be for each town, for each technology, for each location. And I think we were foresightful in the targeted watershed management plan by issuing a series of appendices, each one of which dictates the protocol for computing the credit. And it's not as easy as it seems, and this was important because it got the towns to recognize what they were going to have to do to get credits, and it enabled the interface with DEP for DEP to say, yeah, we will support a credit if you follow those protocols. So this is clearly an exercise in adaptive management. And the Cracker Jack Watershed Work Group, it brings to the table a great diversity of experience and ideas, and almost every meeting somebody raises a question that somebody else hasn't thought about. So we've been fortunate to gain funding and to do these 6 important studies to prepare for the implementation of the permit. We've updated the MEP model. We've looked at a nitrogen credit trading. We've looked into credits for stormwater nitrogen management. We've looked at the feasibility of implementing IA systems in Brewster. We've done a lot of work trying to fine-tune our estimates of natural attenuation. And most recently, we looked into salt marsh preservation as a way to ensure that natural attenuation that we're counting on will continue. The first one is the UMass Dartmouth report that was done to update the original model and loading. Done under a SNEP grant, the Southeast New England program, thanks to Tom Ardito, if he's here today. We took the watershed loading that was generated in the 2002 to 2006 range, 20 years ago, and updated it. And the basis of our update was a 5-year period of water use in 2011 to 2015. So we had 10 years worth of inflation to account for. We modified the model to look at those updated watershed loads. We used more recent water quality data. We implemented or input some revised estimates of attenuation. And we also revised the model in terms of its hydrodynamics. Recall in 2007, a change in the hydrodynamics occurred with a new breach. And the result of all of those factors showed that we were going to pretty easily meet the TMDLs, even with the increased growth, but largely because of the improved hydrodynamics. Also, interestingly, the Watershed Work Group has decided for future planning not to count on the current favorable conditions to continue, but to recognize that the prior less beneficial circumstances of pre-2007 are going to come back. So the administrative decision has been made to stick with that less favorable set of hydrodynamics. The second report has to do with nitrogen credit trading. And Andrew Gottlieb spoke well this morning about town boundaries. And if you think about 4 towns in this watershed, each developing their own nitrogen management plan, thinking about what's best for the sites they have, what their preferences are for technology, what the public is expecting in those circumstances, you're going to come up with a diverse set of technologies and plans. If you take the town boundaries away and say, well, let's compare these different approaches as to their cost. How much nitrogen is removed per pound, how many pounds of nitrogen is removed per dollar spent, you're going to find variability. And why do the costs vary? Well, technologies are different as to what they can accomplish. Economies of scale is a factor. Some towns are blessed with favorable sites for nitrogen management or effluent disposal, and some aren't. And nitrogen attenuation plays a role in how much credit you get for technology implemented upstream of freshwater bodies. So you should expect differences in cost. So yank those town boundaries away and say, well, if we have a project that's low cost, why don't we do more of it? And if we have a technology that's relatively high cost, why don't we do less of it? And the combination of of more of an inexpensive approach and less of an inexpensive approach is at the heart of nitrogen credit trading. Now, you have to think about the commitments that towns have made to remove nitrogen. So trading might involve one town taking on more responsibility than was first negotiated. So another town can have less responsibility, and there'd be a financial transaction that accommodates that change in responsibility. So we looked at three alternatives. There's no one specific recommendation, but the three scenarios that were evaluated had a total cost savings across the watershed of $10 million. I showed in an earlier slide that about 10% of the nitrogen load is from stormwater. Well, towns are addressing MS4 requirements sort of independently of this watershed plan. So can we find a way to get credits for the nitrogen benefits of stormwater management? And recall that the 208 plan suggested that towns could take a 25% credit on their nitrogen loading from stormwater if they adopt best management practices. This group wanted to vet that assumption and see whether it's really appropriate in Pleasant Bay. We found that these towns have limited space for best management practices that rely on vegetation. It's easier to put in infiltration systems than it is to buy land to put in a grass swale, say. So we found that in this location, the traditional best management practices maybe are not that applicable. We also found that with infiltration technology, infiltration takes the nitrogen out of the stormwater, but it puts it in the groundwater. It doesn't give us any benefit in terms of protecting the embayments that are nitrogen sensitive. So that combination and looking at a specific case study in the watershed led to the conclusion that about the best that the Pleasant Bay folks can do is about 8% removal, not the 25% that has been suggested as a placeholder. We found that aggressive use of non-structural best management practices, street sweeping, cat space and cleaning, leaf pickup, could make a dent and give a bigger removal. However, the expense of doing that and the relatively small amount of nitrogen to be removed has resulted in these four towns deciding not to try to take credit for stormwater management activities. Brewster was thinking about innovative alternative systems to address some of its nitrogen removal responsibility. An important study was done in 2020 where Barnstable County looked at available technologies and suggested a 12 milligram per liter target. Horsley Witten identified a little over 300 homes that are in watersheds without attenuation that might be the location of these systems. Wright-Pierce developed a cost model to put the capital and O&M costs together. DEP pitched in with a stance on what the appropriate monitoring and oversight should be on individual IA systems. And Horsley and Witten drafted a municipal ordinance that would allow a system they could put forth. So nothing formal has come out of that, but a very good tool for towns to use if you're thinking about using IA systems for getting credits under a watershed permit. We spent a lot of time thinking about natural attenuation, the natural processes that reduce watershed loads before the nitrogen gets to the embayments. And the initial assumption in the MEP report was that we could get 6,000 kilogram per year credit for attenuation. There's some uncertainties about those estimates, and particularly in light of new information on benthic flux in the watersheds. The commission, the Pleasant Bay Alliance commissioned nitrogen mass exchange studies by SMAS to look at 2 watersheds to try and measure how much nitrogen attenuation might occur. And the Alliance hired hydroanalysis to look at all the data and come up with some conclusions. The good news is that we found 3 locations where natural attenuation is probably larger than the first thought. And we think that, although the jury is still out, we may be able to take a 50% increase in the credit for attenuation, about almost 3,000 kilograms per year. In dollar value, that's tens of millions of dollars. So it's a very productive exercise. The Alliance this month will be putting out a climate adaptation action plan and one portion of which is an evaluation by the National Seashore as to the nature and extent of salt marshes in the bay. And in developing a prioritization process to focus on which of those wetlands is the most important, we've incorporated the natural attenuation of nitrogen as a criterion to help to evaluate those salt marshes. And we're hoping that future work will allow us to put a dollar value on the natural processes that are occurring to, one, inform the public on how important it is to protect those resources, but two, to develop sort of a contingency mentality to say, what if we lose those resources through sea level rise? And thanks to the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, I think Courtney's here today, for the funding for that. So we're getting ready to ask DEP to sign in on a revised permit. And the revisions we're looking at are changes in the watershed loads, the attenuation factor. The towns are looking for the opportunity to perhaps tweak their plans for nitrogen removal. Some towns are looking to have maybe a slower pace in implementing plans now that they have a full realization of the costs. And we need to deal with the new aspects of the watershed permit regulations that just came out. I'll talk a minute about growth. We all know that the permit is based on a 2006 MEP report. Each town is looking at how much growth has occurred from that point in time until today, and how much is appropriate to plan for into a maybe 20-year planning horizon. This slide shows some very early results, not yet vetted by the team, but perhaps an additional 6,000 kilograms per year of nitrogen loading needs to be accommodated. And 6,000 kilograms of additional load is 12% across those four towns. But whereas only a third of the existing nitrogen load needs to be removed to meet the TMDLs, 100% of the growth has to be removed. So you factor that in, and it's maybe a 1/3 increase in the amount of nitrogen we'll need to remove. So we've learned a lot in this process, and I guess today's talk is to share that experience with you folks. Clearly, adaptive management is important. I should have listed that 3 times. We know where we wanted to go, but we've learned better ways to get there. And that kind of governs the work we're doing. The MEP reports are a critical starting point, but everybody should know that there's plenty of room for tweaking and fine-tuning moving forward. Consider changes in hydrodynamics and how these natural systems could increase or decrease their assimilative capacity for nitrogen. We think we've shown that a single watershed permit in a multi-town watershed is really the only way to go. The collaboration is a great benefit. The watershed work group that's been established brings the right people to the table monthly. Good decisions get made. It's an excellent collaborative process. We've benefited from grant funding to help fine-tune our understanding of the bay and the removal requirements. And thanks again to the funders of that. We issue an annual report, which is not required under the new program, but it certainly provides a wonderful way to get people to refocus on what's accomplished and where we move. And the next part of the program is intended to give thumbnail sketches of where the towns in the association stand. George Meservey, the longtime town planner in Orleans, has been a very valuable member of the team, not available today, so I'll try to summarize where Orleans has been. Orleans completed a comprehensive wastewater management plan in 2010, and it went through MEPA review. Unfortunately, the town meeting chose not to fund the follow-on work by just a handful of votes on 2 different occasions. And at that time, the Cape Cod Commission's 208 plan was being laid out. So a water quality advisory panel was convened in 2015, and it issued its so-called consensus agreement to limit sewers to just the downtown area and Meeting House Pond, to focus as much as possible on shellfish aquaculture and IA systems, and to vet out several other non-traditional technologies like habitat restoration, floating constructed wetlands, PRBs. That evaluation of those technologies occurred over about 5 years, during which time the The limited scale wastewater treatment plant was designed. It started operation in last March, a little bit more than a year. And since then, Orleans has formally amended their CWMP and put together a sewer master plan. And the sewer master plan will sewer about 55% of town over a long period of time, 15 phases, with many of the first phases focusing on Pleasant Bay. They will continue with the successful Lonnie's Pond aquaculture system, and they intend to use PRBs as a quick strike capability in places where nitrogen removal is eventually to provide sewers, but to be done earlier to affect water recovery. Here's the allocation of responsibility, and on the right-hand side, you see the 4 5-year segments that Orleans is working to accomplish. Here's a map of Orleans. Notice that the gold shaded area is Orleans watershed in the Pleasant Bay system. The pink is at the Nauset system and the Rock Harbor system, where there's no TNDL yet, but it's expected that nitrogen removal will be required. So part of the sewer master plan is to figure out the best way to deal with all the areas of nitrogen removal, with higher priority on Pleasant Bay because there's a permit, no TMDL yet in Nauset. And it's that holistic approach in the sewer master plan that's really allowed the town to focus on their capital management plan and help fine-tune how fast they can afford to meet the nitrogen removal requirements in Pleasant Bay. And I'll turn it over to Greg.
Thanks, Mike. So, probably a lot of you have seen me give presentations before, but thanks, Lee, on this topic. My wheelhouse has expanded significantly in the last 7 months. You'd probably see Dr. Bob up here otherwise, but rest assured he's very much enjoying his opportunity to travel. Let's see, so Chatham is about 30% of the watershed with 23% of the load. And basically our overall strategy has always been, and intending to go into the future, sewer, which makes for a relatively quick presentation with regard to our overall strategy. But basically the table you're looking at right here is from our 2018 Pleasant Bay nitrogen removal plans. So everything in green means that the town of Chatham is planning to remove more than what is required for the TMDL. So really, we're standing on the shoulders of giants. Between Dr. Bob and Jeff Gregg from GHD, a significant amount of work has been done in the town of Chatham to move this process forward. We've been looking at nitrogen remediation efforts since 1998. Our comprehensive wastewater management plan came out in 2009, and we really haven't changed from that plan overall. Some of the exact timing, some of the implementation schedule may have changed a bit, but really we're staying the course on that. One of the things that I found very impressive coming to the town of Chatham is that over $140 million has been appropriated since 2010. We have our wastewater treatment facility, and we're already scheduled to appropriate another $10 to $20 million every 2 to 3 years until we're done. Now, that said, sewering is relatively simplistic to talk about, but it does take a while and it is expensive. This particular table over in the corner shows that we did accomplish some of our nitrogen removal just due to our fertilization regulations, but a lot of our nitrogen removal isn't going to go into effect still for a number of years. So that's certainly one of the things that I've appreciated kind of moving into this role is the flexibility and certainly the open communication with Drew and the other folks at Mass DEP. So, like I said, we're still following our CWMP, and it's broken into 2 main phases, the first of which is to encompass all of our TMDL requirements, the second of which is for the rest of town. So that phase 2 is why we're green in the previous table. We're anticipating removing pretty much all nitrogen from our wastewater. So there'd still be a little bit from fertilization, there might be a little bit from stormwater, but this is really the lion's share. You probably saw in one of the earlier slides, around 75% of the nitrogen is from wastewater. So by covering this, we're going to certainly meet and exceed any of our TMDL requirements. If you're looking at that image, sorry, I'm not going to be able to see everything on there, but the areas in red are already sewered. Our areas in green are in design or currently in construction. And then our dark blue is that phase 1, which means that's everything else we need to meet our TMDLs. And phase 2 is the rest of town in light blue. So this is the overall town of Chatham strategy, but obviously it's further broken down by our partnership with the Pleasant Bay Alliance and the other 3 towns within. So what we're doing right now is breaking down our sewer sheds into the watersheds to try to figure out exactly when the implementation of these various phases are going to account for the nitrogen removals required and at what time. So we were able to submit a NOI for all the rest of our watersheds except for Pleasant Bay Alliance, that was already covered. But what we have going forward is looking to see exactly when we do it and to account for growth that's already happened since our CWMP and our various kind of annual reports looking at that, and then what our potential growth might be in the future. So what that's looking at, we're able to accomplish this now. We were awarded a NSNRA grant for fiscal year 24. Working with Courtney has been very helpful, and really our team at GHD is moving as fast as humanly possible, maybe more so, to try to get the numbers required. So a lot of this is just documenting and forecasting what sewering means to be able to share that information with our partners for the annual reporting. But basically, we're still sticking with sewer. That's not saying it's not difficult to kind of get the message across over time, but the town has been somewhat surprisingly consistent over the years about allocating funding for this project. I think the town really understands the value, and again, the folks who came before me communicated that wonderfully to the voters of town. So basically, in our short term, we have our NSNRA grant that's going to show us our nitrogen removal needs, how that's compared to the original, assessing the growth, and we're using that to tweak our horizon planning to show exactly what we're going to remove when for the documentation. The short story is, we'll get there, we just have to show folks exactly when we are. And I think Mark's up next, and that's probably a much longer story.
Well, good afternoon, and being the last of the 4 speakers, it can't be that long a story, so I'll work this through with you. I'm going to give you an overview of Brewster's plan under the Pleasant Bay Watershed permit. And as Mike has mentioned, about a quarter of the watershed is within Brewster, but about 13% of the nitrogen load is coming from Brewster. And as you look at this map and see a lot of the green, there's a lot of open space that was protected over time and has been purchased since the permit was being developed and things like that. And that dramatically affects the nitrogen load that Brewster needs to work with here. And another key part of this, you can see it, the Captain's Golf Course on the eastern side of Brewster is a significant part of the nitrogen load in the town. And the management of the fertilizer applications at the golf course have already removed 87% of the overall goal that Brewster has to meet for Pleasant Bay. And this just gets into the weeds a little bit. It's a spreadsheet trying to document the load reductions that Brewster has to meet and what's been done to date. And as you can see, it can get very into the weeds in your spreadsheets with this. This is about a third of the watersheds in Pleasant Bay that are summarized here. So when you're looking at this with the Alliance, with all the watersheds in all 4 towns, it can become very interesting to look at all the data here. But Brewster, with some updates to attenuation and other changes with the proposed changes to the permit, has a load reduction under existing conditions of just about 1,600 kilograms. And the golf course, along with the fertilizer bylaw, has removed about 1,400 kilograms of that, or 87% overall. There's another 400 kilograms or so from future build-out, and I'll talk about that in a second, but that factors in here as well. One of the reasons the golf course was able to make such a big change is there's the nitrogen loading factors that were used in the model when it was developed really were not that long after the course was developed, and they were fertilizing pretty heavily to get the turf in better shape and to grow. But those fertilizer applications have really gone way down, and the amount of area that they're fertilizing has gone way down as well. And they now use a spray application for fertilizers every month in the summer instead of putting the granular fertilizers down a couple times a year, which are more likely to leach down into the ground. They're feeding the grass when the grass needs it. And one very interesting thing is, as of last year, they purchased spray equipment that's operated by GPS, so they don't spray off the boundary of a fairway or off the edge of a green. The GPS knows where everything is and only allows certain nozzles to work as they're driving down the golf course. So it makes it very interesting. So there's about 200 kilograms left under current conditions, and then with future build-out, about 440 more that needs to be managed, or about 646 that the town of Brewster has to look at here overall, beyond what has been done to date. And there are some proposed strategies. We're putting together a report to share with the Alliance and with DEP. We've had some preliminary conversations with DEP about some of these proposed strategies. But we've been doing a study over the last 2.5 years on how much of the fertilizer that's applied at the golf course actually enters the aquifer. And based on the preliminary results of that study, we're proposing it could be about a reduction of 260 kilograms. That has to be fully vetted by everybody for it to move forward, but that's the preliminary look at it. Cape Cod National is also a golf course in this watershed with a portion in Brewster, and they've reduced the area that they fertilize, so there's a small credit there. And then the other thing we'll be working through with the Alliance and with DEP is the concept of removing nitrogen through the town's public water supply wells that are located in the Pleasant Bay watershed. About a good amount of the water used in Brewster is pumped from the Freeman's Way wells, and 89% of the water that's pumped there is moved outside of Pleasant Bay. And it's capturing nitrogen, and it's bringing it to the Cape Cod Bay watershed. It's bringing it everywhere else in town. It's also feeding some of the homes within the watershed, and that's why 11% is staying in the watershed. It's not a high nitrogen level because it's in an area where there's a lot of protected open space. It's like 0.2 to 0.3 milligrams per liter, but it is taking that nitrogen out of the Pleasant Bay watershed. And that's a proposal we're bringing to the folks that will make this decisions as we move forward with the implementation of the renewed permit. If all of this comes about, we're at about 98% of the overall removal, and that's based on the assumption that build-out will achieve 100% at the same time as well. And that's something that the town will continue to monitor moving forward. So just a couple final comments in terms of working with the collaboration with the Pleasant Bay Alliance has been very effective and very interesting. Overall, it's a great exercise in scientific communication. When you're talking about the nitrogen impacts of build-out in an attenuated watershed that's been disaggregated between other watersheds, looking at the hydrologic conditions in the estuary, it becomes a mouthful. And it's a great way to wake up on a Thursday morning and start thinking about this stuff. But it's been great to hear other people's approaches to get good assessments of proposals that each town is going to be making. And it's been a great way to have good conversations with DEP too, to be able to have them provide information as the planning process moves forward. And I think that's going to be very helpful as we look at some of these other innovative strategies for the renewal of the permit. So thank you.
So it's exciting to hear about a watershed permit that has been 6 years out there already. It looked like a lot of attenuation has occurred based on the modeling. Are we seeing that at all in any of the monitoring stations that you might have in Pleasant Bay? How are we thinking about when we will see results that are quite evident beyond the important modeling that's being done? Thank you.
Well, so the update of the MEP report that Mike alluded to did update, incorporate additional water quality data collected, some of it post-breach. So it did see some improvement at some of the Sentinel stations, but we haven't met all thresholds at this point in time.
I guess just quickly, a lot of this planning, we're looking at managing nitrogen within the watershed. And for instance, the changes at the golf course in Brewster, that golf course, the groundwater takes more than 10 years to get from the golf course to Pleasant Bay. And that's going to be an issue with estuaries all across Cape Cod, is where sewering areas, there's a time of travel where if you've reduced the nitrogen on a property, you may see the change many years later.
Just a question about the cost of sewering Chatham. I know you said that you appropriated $140 million so far. Do you have an estimate of what the total cost to sewer all of Chatham is?
So, can you hear me like that? So, we have estimates that it's going to cost, the 10 to 20 million for the next, every 2 to 3 years till 2040. But those estimates are fairly old already. So, I think everybody knows costs have gone up, and everything we do is based on an RFP process. We don't necessarily know what these costs are going to come in as, but that is our current estimate right now, but those estimates got blown up a few years ago.
Sure.
So that's where we're at.
So that's per year, but do you have sort of a rough idea of what you're looking at for total cost of the entire sewer system for Chatham? Just we're partially speculatively, just curious what the cost is, like sort of how many homes that would connect.
So one of the things that I really appreciated coming to the town of Chatham was that they shifted the sewer implementation over to DPW. I may not have all the information, but our DPW director does, and we can certainly chat afterwards and I'll get you in touch about it. I don't have the exact number on me.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation. I had read a report a while ago, not too long ago, about the success of Pleasant Bay. And I'm from Mashpee, and as we begin to move forward with our sewering and have gotten support of the townspeople as they've been voting the funding for this, I often wanted to say, as people have asked questions, how long will it take before you see success? I thought I had read a report where you started to see some lay people kind of advice or support saying the fish have started to come back, that this is starting. Is there some way that you can give us a capsular, idea for lay people to understand what the success has been over the last 5 years? 5 years is a very short period of time, and it's very wonderful to see your success but it's nice to be able to share it with people who don't quite understand all the technology that you presented.
I think you raise a really good point, which is how do you sustain community interest and engagement in this whole challenge of water quality protection and remediation. One of the ways that I think has been effective for the Alliance communities has been through our water quality monitoring program, where citizens are out there actually collecting the data and reporting it. So it's all analyzed through laboratories. We have QAPP. It's a completely reliable program, but it's a way also to engage a lot of people in viewing conditions and staying abreast of data collection efforts. We also, though, do try to caution that for all the reasons that Mark just described, changes are going to be slow. And I think it was Dr. Bob who used to say, we took quite a long time to mess things up. It's going to take a while for us to fix things. So it's kind of a combination, but I will say Pleasant Bay is a body of water that has a lot of stewards and people who are out there on the water, who maybe take a walk every day or go out on their boat on a regular basis, will observe things and report them to their local resource managers. And that's also very important information for us to get a hold of. So I think, trying to build stewardship through our water quality monitoring program has probably been the primary way we've helped keep people informed of water quality changes.
And I would just say too, wastewater is obviously the highest percentage of nitrogen load going to Pleasant Bay, but some of the properties right along the edge, if there's stormwater issues or fertilizer right along there, if that gets addressed, that can have some relatively short-term positive benefits.
And one follow-up point, one of the things we considered in our nitrogen credit project was even if the costs are equal between two projects in different towns, if one of them is a near shore project and one is much further up in the watershed, there's the idea that the nitrogen is going to be removed earlier might be a reason to affect that trade.
I have a question related to sea level rise. Are you taking that into account at all? Because it took a long time to get to this bad point that we are now, and it will take a long time to, quote, fix it. But in the meantime, the sea level rise and climate change is much faster, and will go progressively faster. And I think by the time we try to think about fixing it by 2040, those estimates are nothing like what we started with when we measured all the data for MEP reports. It's already totally different. And to base MEP report data on things that are going to happen really fast and change it, by that time the estuaries are flooded regularly and the estuaries will not be at all what they are right now. So I would like to know how much you take that into account.
Well, I think Mike alluded to the coastal climate resilience plan that we are just finalizing this month. And we took a look at a couple of things there. One is the effect of climate sea level rise on infrastructure, and Mike and colleagues at Wright-Pierce prepared a report on that topic as well. But I think in addition, we're just looking at the resilience of salt marsh, which is important for attenuation. So we are seeking to understand how those future changes in climate will affect both infrastructure and resources that could alter the sort of the ecological functions within the estuary. So that's one step that we're taking to try to get a handle on those future changes in the system.
And I would just add from the great infrastructure point of view that a lot of our low-lying areas are areas that need pump stations to get that wastewater to our sewage treatment plant. So we do incorporate sea level rise, storm surge into those pump station designs. Some of the neighbors have, noted that they're much higher than they would have expected, but that's, a certain level of safety that we're trying to incorporate in there. We don't want to spend the money and we don't want to put that infrastructure in harm's way. And it's not just today, it's taking into account sea level rise.
I think that's an excellent question. it gets to the concern that many people have about the accuracy of our planning efforts. The number that I quote daily, it seems, is 17,707 kilograms per year. And I look in the mirror and I say, really? Is it maybe more than 15,000 and less than 25,000? How can we account for sea level rise? How can we account for changes in population, occupancy, and seasonal houses? We need to recognize this is adaptive management largely because we are unable to definitively identify the level of control that we need. So I'm a firm advocate of building in a contingency. Yes, thank you, Chatham, for removing more nitrogen than we think is now needed. But do we do less because of that? Or do we bank that as a contingency for all those things that we can't identify today?